In this program, I want to give you the most up-to-date news about religious freedom and rule of law in China. And in some of the cases, I want to touch on the international news if it's related to the two topics I mentioned on religious freedom and rule of law in China. First of all, I want to just mention there is a major breaking story about the coup d'etat in Burma, or in some of the news report called Myanmar. So what happened was on February the 1st, the military leader of a Burmese army set up a coup d'etat, essentially detained the democratically elected leaders of Burmese government, including the Nobel Peace Laureate Madam Aung San Suu Kyi and the president of Burma and most of her cabinet members. Of course, this coup d'etat has met with the international condemnation from the United States to European Union to the United Nations. The Burmese military got a sharing agreement with the civilian government about 10 years ago, when the Burmese government started their transition from a military rule to a civilian rule. And in one of their constitutional clauses, it does have a provision claiming that the military can claim 1 year or up to 1 year kind of a martial law if there are major national emergency. So in this case, the military claimed the November 2020 election had major fraud, irregularities, and other major issues. Of course, this is a pretext for the coup d'etat. But I have to point out that this last November's election in Burma, did have some issues, especially this over 1.1 million the Rohingya Muslims. As we all know, in the past few years, the Burmese government had been hunting them, and the UN even call it a standard textbook of genocide, with hundreds of thousands were being killed and even massacred in a brutal way. And so hundreds of thousands of the Rohingya, predominantly Muslims, had fled to the neighboring country in Bangladesh in the refugee camps. So many of the Rohingyas, basically they were excluded from casting their vote, despite of a peaceful civilian government with the Nobel Peace Laureate Madam Aung San Suu Kyi as the de facto leader of the government. And some other minority groups were also excluded, and I learned that at least another million of the country's voters were disbarred or disqualified from being casting their vote. So there are some real issues, but nevertheless, this is again a China problem, and not so many in the news report would even report or touch on this. All the big powers, especially the neighboring countries who condemned this military coup d'etat, China is an exception. I mean, Chinese foreign spokesperson did not even call it a coup d'etat, just to say this: we respect the Burmese people, and we call for the Burmese different political parties to reconcile their difference according to its constitution and law. And the Chinese senior government leader calling it in public, this is nothing but a cabinet reshuffling, a cabinet reshuffling with the military takeover, and the communication was cut off, and the soldiers were dispatched all over the major cities, and all the ministers of the civilian government were deposed, and the military has replaced them with their own appointed at least 24 ministers in charge of different departments. So basically, this is another, way showing how the Chinese Communist Party has been using its military, economic, and financial, and certainly their geographical influence to cause a major issue for the international community. As we know, without Chinese military supply to the Burmese military kind of establishment, and including the weapons sale, their technology for surveillance, and the Burmese government could not really survive for a month. And unfortunately, even the civilian government, led by Madam Aung San, had been kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party. And when the whole world has been watching how the Chinese regime used its so-called One Belt, One Road initiative as an economic bowling kind of a tool, penetrating into the societies from Africa to Europe, certainly in South and Southeast Asia and North Asian countries. The Secretary Pompeo called it debt diplomacy. Basically, the Chinese government, in the name of giving a loan to these poor countries to build a reservoir or a highway or a major construction project, of course, the high-speed trains, and it indebted these countries, and to the point some countries like Djibouti in Africa, like another Southeast Asia country, almost claimed bankruptcy. So China then make this country to surrender to the Chinese Communist Party's rule, basically either partial sovereignty given to China by making the Chinese military install a military base over there, like in Djibouti, or basically to make the country bow down by giving up one of their major ports, like in Sri Lanka, for 99 years. It's almost, what the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Prime Minister Mahathir, said, this is a new colonization by the Chinese Communist Party. So let's pray for those Burmese, who had been suffering for decades and decades already And now, their democratic aspiration is taken back, of course, to another 30 years at least. And again, I just hope that the Biden administration and the European Union and other democracies would not just tackle this issue as a Burmese issue. They should know the Communist Party's shadow is very deep operational in the Burmese coup d'etat and afterward. So I want to mention this international news first. Then I want to give you some update about what's going on in religious freedom and rule of law in China, in Hong Kong, of course in West China, Xinjiang, and other areas. So then the final item, I will touch on one urgent issue happening in the United States that we all care about. And first, the news, I want to give you an update of what's going on within China Aid operation. On the end of 2020, China Aid helped orchestrate a rescue for one of the most prominent Chinese human rights defender, Miss Wang Jing. She came to the U.S. on the December 31st, at the last day of 2020. And after suffering years of arbitrary detention for her rights defense work, she was even tortured, in her prison for over 4.5 years. And in a most extraordinary way. I would suggest, if you want to know more, just search more detail on our website at ChinaAid.org and other international news report. So China Aid had sponsored her with the help of the State Department, and finally, after traveling from China to Serbia, the former Yugoslavia country, hiding there, and came to her safety in the United States. This is what she sent us a statement, and what she said. She said, "I considered both the responsibility of the direct victims like me, as well as the mission of our generation to terminate the CCP's tyrannical rule. For too long, it has affected and threatened the safety and freedom of the entire human race." End the quote. Certainly, we have seen what happened, of course, in the past few years in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. And another update story happening right now is about Mr. Guo Feixing, another human rights defender who is perhaps one of the most well-known human rights defenders, maybe next to the lawyer Gao Zhisheng, who had been disappeared 3 years ago, and nobody knows where he is now. And Guo Feixing, he had suffered, for the past 20-some years for his human rights work, and being imprisoned multiple times, and with long-term, imprisonment and suffering torture to the extent is unspeakable, including put electric wire and on his private part, and with electricity torturing. So that is how he suffered. And so we at China Aid, I personally went to Thailand, rescued his wife and their 2 children, including their daughter and their young son, in 2009. And recently, his wife, who now live in Maryland area, had been diagnosed with late term, the fourth stage cancer, and already spread into her liver. So she had a major surgery recently, and then the doctor prescribed her with 24 weeks of chemotherapy. You can imagine how hard it is to the whole family. So Guo Feixing basically already got his passport and got his visa to come to the U.S. to really accompany with his wife for the later really stage of her life. And but on January 28th, when he was about to board his flight, actually he already checking his luggage, already passed the security of the airport, and then on the customs, the Chinese state security basically declared him as a national security threat and banned him from coming to the United States. And so he recounted what had happened at the Shanghai Pudong International Airport. He said Guangzhou's state security will board a plane overnight to come and seize me. This is a tough battle. It has entered the frontline clash. End the quote. So since January 29th, already 3 days had passed. We do not know where Mr. Guo Feixing is being held. So we certainly call upon the international community to urge the Chinese regime from a purely humanitarian perspective to let Mr. Guo to come to the U.S. to attend his wife's really hardest time with their two children. So that shows the real evil over there. I mean, just a purely humanitarian, basis. Who would think you would prevent a husband, a father to come at this time? Yet the Communist Party is doing that. And internationally, there is another piece of news recently happened on January 22nd. We learned that almost simultaneously in two separate locations on January 21st, the suspected Chinese Communist Party connected security apparatus attacked two Kazakhstan nationality, national refugees who escaped from Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So both of them, one man, one woman, they were both covered violation for ethnic minority rights in China. Because they're ethnic minority, they were persecuted. They fled to Kazakhstan, and but China extended its long arm to Kazakhstan and posed as strangers, travelers, and start attacking them violently, and both of them on the same day. So you see, those even who escaped from China do not feel safe. The Chinese spies are operating from Kazakhstan to Russia, to South Korea, to Turkey, and even inside the United States. So in another piece of news happened to the Early Rain Covenant Church in Chengdu. The Chinese regime banned all religious activities during the new Chinese New Year. So the Chinese New Year will be happening on February 11th, 2021, and the Chinese government already started its clampdown. So at approximately 7 a.m. on January 14th, police officers, school district officials, and urban management officers raided home of Liang Huali and Shu Qing, and this is a husband and wife. The security confiscated a number of their personal possessions. At the same time, Brother Liang and Sister Shu, they are both the early Rain Covenant Church members. They were actually guiding their children in their study room. When the raid happened. So the Communist Party are targeting freedom of religion in Sichuan province, in Beijing, and in some other areas. And the Communist Party established patriotic associations. They sent official notices to ban all religious activities during the 2021 Chinese New Year time. That's kind of China's Christmas and Thanksgiving combined. Usually there will be the whole month of celebration. And now we turn over to what's happening in Hong Kong. And we have learned, and the international community have joined us together with 35 groups and organizations. We issued a letter after 53 pro-democracy figures in Hong Kong were arbitrarily arrested. This arrest symbolized the ongoing weaponization of the so-called Hong Kong National Security Law to undermine the democratic aspirations of Hong Kong people. So we call upon the international community to condemn this blatant political repression of Hong Kongers peacefully exercising their rights. So we have also helped rescued some of the Hong Kong democracy leaders when they are facing threat. One of them we rescued already to the United States, and another one to the UK, and several of them were already in Taiwan. So working with our partners in Taiwan, we try to help these victims of political religious persecution to get into safety. Finally, I want to give you an update and analysis of what's happening in the United States on the religious freedom front compared to really what's happening in China. Recently, a church in California, namely the San Jose Calvary Chapel, had been under a severe attack. I would characterize it as a religious persecution case, and the church is being prosecuted by the Santa Barbara County, and now being surveillanced and brought to the court, and the county superior court punished the church for its indoor services. Of course, in defiance of its dictatorial government, California governor's order, forbidden church worship services since March, and actually the church complied in March by shutdown. But when they see the California governor is willing to open the casinos, the gambling locations, and other services, and then ban the churches. I mean, they find this is a real discrimination. So the Constitution, the First Amendment, said very clearly this is, the freedom of religion and freedom of conscience can never be impeded in the name of anything. I mean, certainly not in the pandemic. I mean, the church has masks and has come up with the plan for social distancing. But why the church service? The need for spiritual food is deemed as non-essential, but gambling is deemed as essential. So this is certainly discrimination. Actually, the Supreme Court already made a ruling in a New York Catholic Church versus the New York governor's case. The Supreme Court ruled very clearly and said, no government, no administration can violate the citizens' First Amendment rights, especially religious freedom, freedom of religion. Even in the name of a pandemic, we can't use that excuse to suspend these fundamental rights. So right now, the church is being punished to pay over $1 million fine, and the pastor is being taken to the court already into the federal court. I think the ruling by the Supreme Court is pending, perhaps the first week of February. So let's pray for Pastor McQueer and the members of that San Jose Calvary Chapel, that they can stand firm, like what happened to the pastors at Early Rain Covenant Church in China, and they can defend their rights and at the same time to witness the love and forgiveness of Christ during this process. May the Lord really bless this country, and God bless America, God bless the world, and certainly God bless the persecuted brothers and sisters in China and around the globe. Thank you for your attention. I'll see you next time at the next Bob Fu Report.
Thank you.